Howdy, partners. It's your boy, Mr. Northrup, and one thing I need you all to know is just how much I enjoy making these review videos for you. I'm well aware that you have options as to where you get your U.S. history information. I'm looking at you, John Green and Mr. Betts, and I appreciate having you here.
You love me. You really love me.
But if you happen to venture over to one of those other channels, I'd like to think of myself as an adult who is capable of handling that with grace and dignity. See? Super healthy reaction. So far we've discussed the American Civil War, westward expansion, the Progressive Era, and new imperialism. Next up on our timeline is America's involvement in World War I, known then as the Great War, since, they didn't quite know about the whole World War II thing yet. Now, I have to preface this review by telling you that since this is the Too Long Didn't Read U.S. History channel, we are definitely not going to hear the entire story of the war to end all wars. I'm starting to think some of these nicknames were just a bit premature. Now, this will instead be a fairly pointed view of all things America. Although many countries were initially drawn into the conflict of World War I, the United States maintained a policy of relative neutrality advocated by President Wilson. Elected in 1912 as the 28th President of the United States, Thomas Woodrow Wilson vowed to keep the country out of the war, going so far as to campaign on the clever slogan, "He kept us out of war." However, attacks on American lives and some German provocation eventually made it impossible for him to maintain this promise. Okay, so I know I said this was going to be just about the United States.
You are fake news.
But we have to at least set the stage. In June of 1914, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and his wife were killed by Bosnian Serb Gavrilo Princip as part of a plot orchestrated by a secret military society called the Black Hand. This set forth a series of events, including the activation of the European alliances after an invasion in Serbia that would turn this 1v1 into a battle royale. The alliances were as follows. Great Britain, France, and Russia sided with Serbia in a sort of friend-of-a-friend domino effect, while Germany recognized the empire-building implications of a Western Europe takeover and moved alongside Austria-Hungary. Japan joined the first wave in 1914 of what would be known as the Entente Powers, along with Italy the following year, and rounding out the opposition was the Ottoman Empire and Bulgaria. It was about to go down. The global conflict had several long-term causes, and I've already touched on a couple of them. The first was militarism, or an emphasis on military power. An arms race between Germany and Great Britain in the years leading up to the conflict guaranteed that these two nations in particular would jump at the chance to show off their shiny new toys. As I mentioned earlier, alliances, such as the ones that linked Germany with Austria-Hungary or Britain with France and Russia, ensured that this war would be anything but insignificant in shaping Europe. Now, this ties in quite nicely with imperialism, or the extension of a nation's power over smaller, weaker countries, in that a victory for either side would likely lead to greater influence across the globe. However, it was the blatant nationalism or promotion of a nation's self-interest that cast its shadow out from each participant of this rapidly growing battle. While Americans aligned with the Allies, they tried to stay out of the war. President Woodrow Wilson was firmly opposed to the war and believed that the key aim was to ensure peace, not only for the United States, but across the world. He proclaimed America's neutrality, stating the nation must be neutral in fact as well as in name during these days that are to try men's souls. But in 1915, a German submarine, or U-boat, sank a British passenger ship, the Lusitania, which resulted in the loss of 128 American lives. And so we joined the... Wait, what? I'm sorry, folks. This just in. We didn't declare war in response to the sinking of the Lusitania. We did what? Oh, you've got to be kidding me. More stupid In early 1916, Germany torpedoed a French passenger steamer, the Sussex, prompting a U.S. threat to sever diplomatic relations. The German government responded with the so-called Sussex Pledge, agreeing to give adequate warning before sinking merchant and passenger ships, and to provide for the safety of passengers and crew. Ultimately, the German High Command came to see this policy as unrealistic, and the pledge was upheld only until February of the following year, when unrestricted submarine warfare was resumed. The Royal Navy introduced a convoy system in June of 1917, providing escort vessels for individual merchant ships and guarding against surface gunfire attacks. If these convoys reached areas where U-boats were known to operate, they would drop depth charges to fend off attacks. In March, British intelligence intercepted a coded message from German Foreign Minister Arthur Zimmermann to Mexican authorities that promised the return of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona as a reward if they chose to join German efforts. Once the decoded version of the Zimmermann telegram was published, U.S. citizens were outraged, and there was only one way Congress saw this ending: in a German defeat. Enter America. All focus immediately shifted to mobilization. To simply jump into conflict with our existing military force would have been irresponsible. Initially, President Woodrow Wilson and Congress had hoped the necessary 1 million men would volunteer for the Army. But when by May only about 73,000 men had signed up, it was clear other measures needed to be taken. 6 weeks after the declaration of war against Germany, Congress passed the Selective Service Act. This act required adult males to register for possible conscription, which is just a fancy word for the draft. Anyone who objected to this order and refused to take up arms, whether for religious or ethical reasons, was given the opportunity to snag a non-combat role, since that was not the type of person best equipped for the front lines. And in order for this system to go off without a hitch, government officials made a push to influence public opinion. The Committee on Public Information was a government agency that distributed material intended to influence public opinion and inspire support for America's entry in the war. The organization was essentially a propaganda arm of the federal government and was presented to the public in Congress as a reasonable alternative to government censorship of war news, with adverts that I'm sure have aged super well.
Nope.
Some other aspects of mobilization were the effort of the War Industries Board to coordinate wartime manufacturing efforts, the Food Administration to oversee the production and distribution of food, the Fuel Administration and their regulation of coal and gasoline, and the War Labor Board, tasked with resolving labor disputes. Now, while this was all important to prepare the U.S. for conflict, the elephant in the room was the question of how to pay for the war. Since there was no such thing as a war slush fund, the government increased taxes on the rich, placed a premium tax on luxury items, and sold war bonds to cover the bill. Individual rights were restricted in the interest of national security. The Espionage Act of 1917 was passed 2 months after America's entrance into World War I. It was designed to prohibit the obtaining of information, recording of pictures, or copying national defense descriptions with intent or reason to injure or create a disadvantage for the United States. It permitted censorship of the mail and imprisonment of those who interfered with the draft. Passed on May 16, 1918 as an amendment to Title I of the Espionage Act, the Sedition Act provided for further and expanded limitations, most notably in free expression of opinion that cast the government or the war effort in a negative light, or interfered with the sale of government bonds. But who would ever speak ill of the government, right? That was from my FBI agent who screens my content. Love you, Tom. Smooches. Now, as men went off to war, those who stayed behind filled their places in factories, farms, and railroads. While African Americans were allowed to enlist into segregated units of the U.S. Armed Services, the majority were given support jobs rather than combat roles. Many more remained in the States and contributed to the home front, moving in large numbers from the North to the South to take those vacated positions. This was known as the Great Migration and continued for decades after the war. This led to an influx of Mexicans moving up across the border to work on the southern farms.
He's a circle.
Outside of factory positions, many women supported the war effort by selling war bonds, knitting socks, cooking meatless dinners, joining the Red Cross, and serving as nurses. However, not all who stayed home were allowed to play a part. German Americans faced terrible prejudice, and although physical attacks were rare, they proved violent at times. More than 4,000 were falsely imprisoned, with others suffering vandalism to their homes and businesses. The most widespread damage occurred in the attempted eradication of German language and education. Moving our attention to Europe, the welcomed arrival of the American Expeditionary Force gave the Allies a welcomed boost. Until that point, troops on either side had been stuck in a stalemate, both waiting for the other to move beyond the trenches on the offensive. In the spring of 1918, the Germans launched a major series of attacks, finally breaking the standoff and advancing all along the Western Front. U.S. forces were thrown into action and helped stave off the German assault. Over the summer and into the fall of 1918, U.S. forces played an emerging role as the Allies finally pushed back the Germans on the Western Front. The Allies also advanced on other battlefronts, and one by one, the Central Powers surrendered until Germany stood alone. Finally, on the morning of November 11, 1918, Germany signed an armistice that brought the fighting to an end. President Wilson had already announced America's war aims in the 14-point speech delivered almost a year earlier, and many of those points made their way into the eventual Treaty of Versailles, including a reduction of armaments and a general association of nations that could mediate international disputes, an idea that would birth the League of Nations. Other points included self-determination for the people of Europe, freedom of the seas, equal trade terms, and an end to secret diplomacy. Under the Treaty of Versailles, Germany lost territory to both France and Poland and had its military stripped down to a glorified police force. This was humiliating, but likely most concerning for the people of Germany was the agreement to the War Guilt Clause, with leaders accepting blame for the war and consenting to pay steep reparations to the Allies. We will learn soon just how crippling the economic distress and resentment of the treaty truly was as we discuss the lead-up to the, spoiler alert, Second World War. Although Germany got the raw end of the deal, Austria-Hungary was carved into several smaller nation-states, and the Ottoman Empire was also dismantled, eventually disappearing into the cruel, cruel night in 1922. Oh, and remember that really neat idea President Wilson had about forming the group of mediation nations?
Conjunction, junction, what's your function?
Well, although the League of Nations largely existed due to his 14-point speech as a means to prevent aggression and to protect the peace in that part of the world, the U.S. showed hesitancy and ultimately chose not to ratify the treaty and join. There were many factors that played into this decision, with a desire to preserve American lives and avoid further European entanglements at the top of their list. And there you have it. That's the U.S. and World War I in a nutshell. Now this is me in a nutshell.
Oh, help, it's me, Mr. Northrop, but you can't see me because I'm stuck inside this nutshell.
Now I know the burning question on all of your minds.
When can I see you again?
On our 6th episode, we'll be discussing the 1920s and U.S. foreign policy. By the time we're done, you will understand how new ideas and social movements following World War I led to social, economic, and political change in America. We will also encounter efforts by the United States and other world powers to avoid future wars. If you're watching this during test week, I wish you good luck and hope you enjoy your holiday break. If you're not watching this during test week, what are you doing? Go outside. Take care. We'll see you next time.